Welcome back. Today we're going to do a quick one on the Tipsy Dunmer Pro 4. So Tipsy is a brand that's been around for quite a while. They've actually been around since 2016. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the brand, they tend to work with musicians and professionals in the music industry. So their tunings are, a little bit different than what you would typically pick up for, say just general purpose music listening. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a second, but this is the Dunmer Pro 4, and let's see if we can get a look at the drivers. This is a hybrid model. So there is a bone conduction driver doing the very low end. There is a dynamic driver, which is that guy right there, doing the mid to lows, and then there's two balanced armatures doing the uppers, which are kind of right there. So actually a cool configuration, actually really nicely done. They picked actually quite nice drivers on this one. I was a little bit surprised that they actually sound quite good. But, again, I would say the tuning leans way more along the lines of professional use, professional mixing, producing, monitoring. That, again, their signatures tend to be a little bit more vocal centric than what people are used to. But you do get a really nice case with it. You do get a cable, and again, they would say that the cable is nice and light and flexible for long session use or for performing. And again, it is quite nice. It actually has a really nice look to it, quite shiny, really nice SPC coating on it. So yeah, I think they actually did pretty nice on the cable actually. So we'll move some of these things out of the way. This is the box. You can kind of read the story there if you hit pause. But we'll move this to the side, and then we'll talk about what is happening here. So what is it? As I said, this one is a one bone conduction, one dynamic driver, two balanced armatures inside a hybrid configuration, and it's tuned just like this. And I will say it always looks kind of strange when you look at these sets, but this tuning is exactly what I thought that this particular Tipsy set was going to look like. I would say other Tipsy sets are kind of variations on exactly this. And again, they tend to focus right here on the vocals and de-emphasize this and this. These sets are tuned for people who have a very much a specific viewpoint about what this should sound like, and their tunings tend to be exactly look like this. So this wasn't a surprise at all. This wasn't this is exactly what I thought this frequency response was going to look like. I knew it was going to be some flavor of really boosted upper mids, vocal area. That's exactly what they delivered. So not much of a surprise to me. So what does this graph mean? And kind of what I was alluding to. Tipsy develops for professional musicians and producers. Their signatures tend to be very focused on the vocals and de-emphasize everything else. The signature has a really heavy point of view as to what's important and how it should sound, and that this isn't going to be for everyone. But I would say that Tipsy, I would say NF Audio, NF Acoustics, I think is how they are referred to now. Both of these companies develop signatures along the same lines for the same type of people. They both are very, very vocal centric, basically both for professional musicians and producers. They do very similar signatures. So again, this isn't a surprise to me. It shouldn't be a surprise for people who are familiar with the background on Tipsy. But if you aren't a musician or a producer, you can EQ it, and the drivers are really high quality. Kind of, as I said, it kind of caught me off guard when I started poking around in EQ, what's really going on. So when we look at kind of the EQ chart of what I did, if we look at the sub bass is the bone conduction, and I will say that this combination of bone conduction doing the sub bass and a 6.5 millimeter dynamic driver doing the lower mids to mids, a little bit unique. Again, it kind of caught me off guard. I'm like, well, that is a really cool sound. It has a couple of advantages of doing this. For one, the sub bass on a bone conduction, so you don't have that denseness that you're going to get on a dynamic driver, or even worse, a cheaper dynamic driver, where that sub bass becomes a little bit too dominant and too clouding the mids. And again, that was never going to happen on the original tuning because the subs are kind of rolled down. But as you push up, even if that was a 10 millimeter dynamic driver, you kind of push it a little bit hard, it starts to cloud the stage and the mids, and I don't think that was ever going to happen on a Tipsy developed set. So it was a really, really smart choice to put a bone conduction driver doing the subs, because you get this really sub-bass presence, but not this really dense, overwhelming, sort of bloated. It avoided all of those things that you would point at to dynamic drivers doing sub-bass in a kind of a, not so great of a driver. So I think this was a really, really smart choice on what they did. Put the bone conduction way out there in the sub bass, and you get a sub bass presence, but not that dominant sub bass that wouldn't have really mixed with their style of tuning. So quite smart doing that. And then you get a 6.5 millimeter dynamic driver. So I did bump up the bone conduction just to make it heard, so I could hear what was going on. And again, I like it. I like it quite a bit. Then they put this 6.5 millimeter dynamic driver, and that's kind of doing this. And again, 6.5 millimeter dynamic driver, not the same as a 10 millimeter dynamic driver. You got to boost it a little bit just to fill in the difference between the sub bass and where the mids. These can be boosted just quite a bit. And again, if you look at a normal typical graph for a 6.5 millimeter dynamic driver, they tend to be a little bit more exaggerated. So I don't have a problem with boosting the mid bass on this particular driver because of what it is. It's a 6.5 millimeter, and you can actually fill in the mid bass in that way. And 6.5 millimeters, they don't really have a problem doing that kind of tactile, impactful style sound. They have a little bit harder doing more of the sub bass. So again, a really smart choice to put that driver here because that's what it's better at, and then leaving the bone conduction to do the lower end. Again, quite thought out. When you look at the original signature and how it sounds, you don't really get this thoughtfulness to it because this is actually quite bright, and these two are very hard to hear. But when you actually bump this down and EQ kind of the way I did it, and again, this is about 5 dB, probably above the Harman target. You can move it down 3 dB, 4 dB. If you want to move it down all 5, you can certainly do that. I didn't do that because I thought the balanced armatures, it's a pair of nulls, I thought they're actually quite nice, and I left them. I think this is probably 2, 3, 3, so that's +2, +3 kind of at the mid bass, and then -2 or 3, I'm not sure which one that is, but that's probably a -1 as well. So not really big changes on the EQ, but just to really kind of get rid of that peak. So it's not so vocal forward, vocal focused, and kind of push them back to where they are in line with the other drivers. And again, it's quite nice. These are a pair of nice nulls. So you do get this, again, you get this sub bass that isn't so dominant, so isn't so dense, so it doesn't sound all that different, or at least in density wise and presentation wise. It actually fits in with the hybrid model. And again, smart choice on that. 6.5 millimeter dynamic driver, again, not going to be a dominant presence on the bass. It's just going to kind of fill in and complement the mids, bring these down, and then the balanced armature takes over, so that's speedier, faster, more technical. This is still going to be tuned a little bit like the professional use case, so it's still going to sound a little bit sharper, a little bit more detailed, kind of along the lines of what they were going for. I'm sure that they chose these particular drivers for the sound on how they do vocals, so that comes through. And then once you push this down, then the upper treble actually does become heard and present, and the whole thing, it was actually tuned quite nice in the upper treble. They have some presence there just to give it a little bit of air, but again, not to be so distracting. So when you bump down the upper mids a little bit, this will become more present, and it will get a little bit more of an airy presentation. So yeah, I was actually, for a hobbyist who maybe runs across this set on a used price, I would say it's a little bit expensive. It's on the $400 side. That's a little bit expensive to go buy it and then to start really poking at it in these ways. And from a hobbyist point of view, I'm kind of enchanted with this combination of drivers, how they put it together and how it sounds when you EQ it, and kind of really lean it towards how you would expect it to sound and what your ear prefers. Really, really nice combination of drivers. But again, a little bit expensive to kind of just poke at it and have fun at it. But, we'll kind of go through some of the points that I had here. The configuration is actually interesting, like I said, that BC for sub bass, 6.5 millimeter for the mid bass and the mids, and null BA for the upper range. Sub bass, so the sub bass bone conduction has a nice really separation between these two. Again, I think people try to do mids, you put like a mid tuck here, you try to create some separation between the sub bass and the mid bass. And here you're kind of getting a physical separation because you have this bone conduction driver, which is again, it's a really hard to describe. How I would say it acts more like a passive radiator. It sort of catches some of the emphasis on the bass, but not necessarily the whole bass. So it's kind of an interesting way to have a cleaner style bass, because it doesn't really flow straight into the mid bass the way you're thinking that a normal dynamic driver does. So yeah, really interesting. It almost sounds like there's some separation between the two. And then you have this 6.5 millimeter dynamic driver. Again, it doesn't have that dominating presence. That is going to give you a little bit of separation from these two into the mids. And then the balanced armature is going to take over, and that's going to have a little bit more presence and a little bit more forward. And again, it's going to sound a little bit more separated. So really cool. I mean, as far as a hybrid sound, and a hybrid sounding like a hybrid and not like a dynamic driver, I think this is one for those people. I tend to like that style as well, but if you're a timbre person, you're probably going to go absolutely crazy on this because of the different drivers and how they sound and how they are changed in EQ. So not for you guys, but for you guys who are really interested in how drivers sound in pairs, I think it's actually a very, very cool set in that respect. So the mids, again, the bone conduction, dynamic driver, less persistent. It blends better with the Knowles upper mids. It still leans very detailed and resolving, like I said, because of the drivers that they probably picked in this case. And the treble, as you would expect, it's just harder to hear the extension out here. If you look at the stock tuning, this is going to be your dominant focus. This is actually de-emphasized. But if you bring this down in EQ, it will come into audible range, and you will actually hear the extension. This sounds like a nice dynamic driver, balanced armature, extended hybrid sounding like a hybrid, as I said. And the stage, again, the stock is way too focused on the central image. That's sort of what they want for their professional use case, so that's not much of a surprise. But with EQ, it actually takes on a surprisingly 3D style to it. And again, I was kind of enchanted by what was going on here and how it all sounded in stage and immersive and kind of 3D. Much better than I thought it was going to be, just with just a little bit of EQ. So that is what I got on the Dunmer Pro 4. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.